The first thing that I want to point out is if you look at this cost function, it's a total cost and it's just strictly increasing in quantity, right? So just strictly increasing in quantity. There's no plateau, and the rate of increase is, of course, constant. Your marginal cost is 20. But also, I want to point out to you guys that if you find the average total cost is 640 divided by Q plus 20. And this average total cost function is one of those average total cost function that is indicative of natural monopoly. Remember, with your natural monopoly, as you increase your quantity, your average total cost will decrease, and it just decreases continually. And if I were to draw, if I were just to on the aside sketch that, this is my average total cost, and I'm saying my average total cost is going to be equal to 640 over Q plus 20. And if I were to sketch on the aside what this looks like, this is my quantity. This will be my marginal cost, which, by the way, is equal to my average variable cost. This is in dollars, of course, this is cost. And my average total cost is doing something like this. So my average total cost is definitely greater than 20, right? My average total cost is definitely greater than 20, but because I have 20 plus some animal here. But what you want to realize is that as quantity increases, this first portion of our equation is just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but it just never reaches 20, right? 640 divided by 10,000 is still a number greater than 0. And so this is still going to be greater than 20. And so you have that asymptotic, you have it decreasing, and it becomes, it never touches your marginal cost curve. And so this is an example of a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly is a monopoly where as you increase the quantity or as they produce more and more, they're able to decrease their average cost, right? They're able to decrease their average cost. And so, naturally they create a barrier to any potential new entrants. And the idea that if anyone tries to come in, they can just produce more. They have the capacity to do so, right? And because they never reach a minimum, and they can just continue in, producing more, decreasing their cost on average, and essentially price you out of the market if they so desire. So that's just an aside, but let's get back to that profit maximizing situation. So finding Q star. So you're going to set your marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So I have 100 minus 4Q. And I'm pretty sure while I was talking, somebody went ahead and found the answer. And you know how I am, right? I have this little adding machine that is solar powered. So you know that it's going to take me a while because it's not like I'm outside, right? So it's going to take me a while for me to determine the answer for this. So I'm just going to guess that somebody already have the answer and they're telling me this in the chat, right? Thank you. Somebody totally did. Thank you, Jennifer. And so the quantity is equal to 20. And then also, because it's going to take me a while, someone will tell me the price, and your price, so this is and, the price is going to be equal to 100 minus 2 times 20, and that is going to be equal to $60. I know it takes a while for you to find the 6 on your calculator. Thank you so much on your computer to type it in, and I appreciate you getting that into me really quickly. So the profit maximizing quantity is 20, and the profit maximizing price is equal to 60. And if we wanted to write out the profit, so I would say and our profit at 60 is equal to what? Well, we can find our revenue at 60, and the revenue is going to be equal to $60. The revenue, not at 60, I'm sorry, at 20, the quantity is 20. So the revenue at 20 is equal to 60 times 20, which is equal to, that's too much math for me, 60 times 20, that's equal to $1,200. And our cost at 20 is equal to 640 plus 20 times 20. That's also a lot of math for me, but I think it's equal to 1,040. Let's make sure. 20 times 20 is 400 plus 640 on a fantastic day is equal to 1040. So our profit at 20 is equal to 1,200 minus 1040. Somebody's helping me out fantastically with the profit, so I don't have to. Thank you so much. It's equal to 160. Thank you so much. So this is equal to 160. Special thanks to my helpers here in the chat room. Mustafa, thank you so much. So the profit is equal to 160, and so our monopoly is enjoying a fantastic profit. We can also graph this, right? So thank you. We can also graph this. So we can set up our graph. We can graph what it looks like. We can put in our marginal cost. We know that this is our demand. We know that this is our marginal revenue. And as I was mentioning to you before, I can just, if I want, make my cost. You know what? Let's do this. Let's make this a different color because I want to make my cost function. I want to make it so that you can see. So this is marginal cost, and let's just make, shouldn't be touching. Let's just make our cost. Shouldn't be touching. I told you guys that I wasn't the best at. This is my average total cost, right? So I want you guys to be able to see profit max quantity on the demand line, right? So, we haven't gotten yet to P equal MC because, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because what I want us to realize is that what we did was we find where MR is equal to MC. And when we find where MR is equal to MC, we got the quantity of 20. And what I think you're saying is that we made sure we go up to the demand curve to figure out what the price is, which is 60. So we went up to the demand curve to figure out what the price is, and we figured out that the price is 60. On a separate note, why I did all of this is because I want you to be able to see that. Notice that at the quantity of 20, our average total cost is actually equal to 52, right? And so that this area, right, which is bordered by the price, the average total cost, and the quantity, this area is our profit. So this is our profit, which is also equal to your price minus average total cost and all of that times quantity. Now, there's a reason why I want to show you this situation. Yes, and you're right, that is for the socially optimal, and we're going to get to exactly that in a minute. The reason why I wanted to show you this situation, because I wanted to talk a little bit about the supply curve. And we talked about market supply quite a big deal when we were talking about our when we're talking about a competitive market. Stop for a minute. We talked about market supply when we were talking about our competitive market, and we talked about summing up all the marginal cost curve to give us that supply curve. When we look at our monopoly, we really don't talk about margin. We really don't talk about that supply curve because it's really not looking at your marginal cost and picking a point on your marginal cost, your price quantity combination. If you notice what is happening here, even though we use the marginal cost curve to determine the quantity, the price that we are charging is not coming from our marginal cost curve. It is actually coming from the market demand curve. And so because of that, we really don't have what you would say a supply curve for the monopoly. In essence, what you're doing for the monopoly is looking for that price quantity combination that will allow you to maximize your profit. And in some sense, you're getting the quantity from marginal revenue equal marginal cost. So it's not really, you're getting it from marginal revenue equal marginal cost, but you're picking up the price from the demand curve. And so since you really don't have that one curve that is giving you the price and the quantity supply, right? In the competitive market, the marginal cost curve very nicely gave us each point on the marginal cost curve very nicely gave us the price and the quantity supplied. But here, we can't use the marginal cost curve for the competitive firm to get that kind of visual, right? Because while the quantity is coming from marginal cost, the price is actually coming from the demand curve. So you really don't have a supply curve for your monopoly. So your monopoly is actually enjoying profit and it's quite happy in this situation. And there are two things that I want to bring out before we talk about whether this firm is being socially efficient or not. And this is to the point that was coming up in the chat. Thank you, Andrew. Before we get into that socially efficiency idea, let's look at what's happening right here with this monopoly, because this monopoly is able to charge a price that is greater than the marginal cost. So segueing into what we have, we can see here that the monopoly charges a price greater than marginal cost. And this is kind of significant because if this was a competitive market, the price is equal to marginal cost. In other words, you're literally charging the price that it is to produce that last unit, right? So you're not getting anything. If you remember, for a competitive market in their long run equilibrium, that price in that long run equilibrium, they end up having normal profit, right? So there was no super normal profit because they're end up charging a price equal to marginal cost, which is also equal to average total cost. But if you look here, the monopoly is charging a price that is equal to $60, and that is surely greater than the marginal cost of $20. And so in this case, where the monopoly is charging a price, being able to do this, you say the monopoly has market power. Now, there is something attached with the elasticity of demand and the amount of market power that you would want to say that the monopoly has. But if you want to talk about a price markup, then you would say the markup is really just that distance between the price and the marginal cost. So the markup is equal to the difference between the price and the marginal cost, right? I'm gonna get even more talking about this markup. But so here in this case, the firm is able to charge a markup of $40 per unit on its product, right? So in this case, the monopoly charges a markup of $40. So in this case, in the sense that the marginal cost is the additional cost to produce the last unit. And if he's producing and selling 20, then the additional cost to produce that, the 20th, that last unit is $20, but he's selling it for $60. So he has a markup of $40 on that particular last unit. But not only are we seeing this kind of situation, we can also look at it in terms of elasticity. And so if you look at it in terms of elasticity, recall, we have marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And if you recall that marginal revenue function that I gave you, I said price times the one, you remember this function that you're trying to forget ferociously, but it's not happening. We have the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So if I bring marginal cost over to the left hand side and I take the bracketed over to the right hand side, then I have price divided by marginal cost is equal to uh, sorry, price divided by marginal cost is equal to 1 divided by 1 plus 1 over the elasticity of demand. Now, of course, I can make this all fancy, write it better. I mean, I can essentially say this is the same as saying the elasticity of demand divided by the elasticity of demand plus 1. So I can make it all fancy and rewrite it in another way. But what is this essentially saying to me? Well, and if you remember, the elasticity of demand is negative, right? So the more elastic this becomes, right? So just think about -2, think about -5. So let's work with -2 first. This is going to be -2 in the numerator divided by -2 plus 1, which is going to give me -2 divided by -1, so it's equal to -2. But let's say this is minus 5. This is going to be -5 divided by -5 plus 1, which is -5 over -4, which is going to give me 1.4. So when it was 2, I had the price over marginal cost is equal to 2. But when my elasticity of demand is -5, I have my price over marginal cost is equal to 1.4. So my 1.25, I'm sorry. So my point being is that as you get more and more elastic, right, moving from -2 to -5, and you can even play with -10, this becomes -10 over -9. And on a good day, right, 10 divided by 9 on a good day is 1.11. If I make this -100, just to make my point, then this becomes 100 divided by 99, and that is equal to 1.01, and I can make it 1,000, and I can go on and on and on and on with this kind of scenario. But my point is, as we get more and more elastic, then price over marginal cost becomes closer and closer to one. So the more elastic we get, the more our denominator gets closer to our numerator, right? And so P over MC gets closer and closer to one. Well, what do we know about markets that are more elastic? Then these are your markets that tend to have less market power. If you think about it, the more elastic your product is, this suggests that there are closer substitutes, right? If it is so elastic that if the price increases by a small amount, your quantity is going to decrease by a much, much larger percentage, then that is, you're going to fall off and not buy that product anymore. It's going to be a huge decrease in your quantity. Then it's also suggestive of there being substitutes for that product. And if there's substitutes for that product, then you don't have that much market power, right? And then exactly what you're saying, Asulu, then it leads to a more competitive market situation, right? So my point here, just for some of us, that as ED becomes more elastic, so just more elastic, as the market becomes more elastic, more elastic. And remember, we're talking about the elasticity of demand here. So as the market becomes more elastic and becoming more elastic, ED increases in absolute terms. Then P over MC gets closer to 1. And the firm has less market power. And exactly what Asulu said, that it becomes to look more and more and more like a competitive market. So there it was, you're selling your chocolate chip cookies, and you thought you could engage with having a markup your price over marginal cost. You were trying to have a markup of a certain amount of money over it, and you realized when you were charging the higher price, you were charging $2 for 3 cookies, and you were making a profit, and you decide, you know what, I'm gonna charge a higher price. I didn't realize people love this cookie so much, and I'm selling out, and people still want more, so I'm going to charge a higher price and end up selling less, of course. And you go ahead and you charge a higher price. And then only to find out that when you increase your price, yes, the quantity demanded decreased, but it decreased by such a large amount that your profit actually decreased, right? Your total revenue decreased so significantly, and then you came to the realization that, wait a minute, I should have figured out what was the price elasticity of demand for my cookies. And turns out that people have a lot of substitutes for chocolate chip cookies, right? They can always get cucumber cookies. They can get carrot cookies. They can get jalapeno cookies. All of these are fantastic substitutes to chocolate chip cookies. And then you realize that your good is not that inelastic, that it actually is a very elastic good. So one more thing to talk about this is there is what we call the Lerner Index. And this is also one with our measure of our price, um, a measure talking about the price markup as well. Don't go for the jalapeno. I mean, I was wondering if no one was listening to my variety of cookies, and but I see since you made a point about the jalapeno cookies, then I'm gonna guess that the cucumber cookies and well, carrot cookies, carrot cakes are good. So I can imagine that carrot cookies are also good. So we'll just go for the cucumber cookies, and those are fantastic close substitutes to the chocolate chip cookies. The Lerner Index, your Lerner Index, which looks on your price markup, looks on your price markup as a function of the price. So it's a measure of the price markup as a function of price. It's a measure. So our Lerner Index, you could say your L is equal to uh, P minus MC over P. And this is the same as, believe it or not, minus 1 over the elasticity of demand. Now, once again, don't be surprised with the minus 1. I mean, of course, you can work this out, right? You know what your price is. You can work it out. Um, but don't be surprised at this minus here, because remember your elasticity of demand is negative, right? So you need that minus sign to make everything positive. So, you shouldn't be surprised at seeing this. But also realize what this means is that if this value is equal to 0, right? So the only way I can get this value being equal to 0 is that my elasticity of demand is so large, right? So maybe my elasticity of demand is negative 10,000. And if you put it in your trusty calculator, I'm using my adding machine that uses solar power. But if I put 1 over 10,000, then I'm going to get 0.001. So I can imagine 1 over 100,000 is going to give me one more zero in front of that one. So as your price elasticity of demand gets larger and larger and larger, your Lerner Index gets closer and closer and closer to 0. It almost becomes 0. And when it is equal to 0, then it means that you're in a very competitive situation. So we can see it with this elasticity of demand, but you can also see that for you to get it equal to 0, then the price has to be equal to marginal cost so that your numerator is 0. And that we know is true for our competitive market. So when it is 0, then it is competitive. Let's put a big thing here, and we have the index. And then when you get it equal to 1, then you have more market power, and this is, of course, a less elastic demand. More market power, and then, of course, less elastic demand. And of course, like I said, if you're trying to think of goods where you're having um, of goods where it's less elastic, once again, just think of goods where there are not that many close substitutes, and there are not many firms. And like I try to give, I like to think about medicine for life, because some of these medicine for life that you have, there are really not that many close substitutes. So if you think about something like the EpiPen, something for if you have an allergic reaction to nuts, that is a medicine for life, right? you want to have that pen if you're allergic to nuts and somehow you mistakenly consume or touch or ingest some nuts or something like that. And you want to have it very close by so you can imagine that something like that. Right now, I can't think of a close substitute to in terms of medicine to such a drug. And so things like medicine for life tend to be very inelastic because they don't have close substitute, and whoever is producing them has some amount of market power. And if you do some research on the EpiPen, actually, I think a few years back there was a big outcry because they were increasing the price of the EpiPen. I think it was like a huge percentage. I don't want to lie, but I think they were going up to like almost 300% increase in the price of the EpiPens or something like that. It was a big jump in the price of the EpiPen. And of course, you got this huge cry out because a lot of people depended on this. And then, of course, you can get into the ethical issues and whether, it's a just increase and so forth. But if you think about it, for a firm that is producing, if you think about it purely from an economic perspective and you forget about everything else for a second split, you would realize that if it is such an inelastic good, an increase in the price of the good will definitely lead to an increase in total revenue. And if you're not changing the cost of producing that particular good, that increase in total revenue will just translate into greater profits for you. So, of course, that's why you take you gotta think about these things that you're doing. You don't want to just do it just because my profit will go up. You got to think about the ethical reasons behind doing certain things like that, and so you want to be careful. Just in case you're out there and you're the only provider of ice cream, and you're the only provider of ice cream, and you want to charge a high price. It's so hot outside, and you're the only provider, and you want to go ahead and charge a very large price for your ice cream. You got to think about whether that is the right thing to do or not. Now, back to something that was very important that was brought up, and that was, are you being socially efficient? So one of the things that we talk about here with the monopoly is the monopoly socially efficient? We're looking on this relationship between price and marginal cost, and the question is the monopoly being socially efficient? And what does it mean to be socially efficient? We talk about deadweight loss and so forth. You guys have seen these terminologies. But let us look closely at what the monopoly is doing by charging a price that is greater than marginal cost. And when we think about efficiency, okay, so I'm going to bring out this idea of efficiency versus equilibrium. So here we're going to talk about, so this is about efficiency. When we think about efficiency, what is important with efficiency, and this is talking about productive efficiency, right? Productive and allocative efficiency, meaning, back up with me a minute and think. Here we have scarce resources in our economy. We use our scarce resources to produce a particular good or service, and we're being productively efficient in how we're using our scarce resources. In other words, we're not wasting it, eh? We're not wasting it in the production process. We are using it in the best way possible to produce this particular good or service. Okay, great. Now, when you're selling this particular good or service, the question is the value received from the person who is purchasing this good or service equal to the cost to produce that particular good or service? And you got to think about that cost in what is involved in the cost, which is why I was talking about this allocative efficiency, is that you're using resources scarce that could have been used to produce something else. Remember, we talk about opportunity cost when we were talking about total cost and so forth. And so if I am going to use your labor or whoever, then if I'm using your labor, and if I'm going to use a loan from the bank to purchase machinery and equipment to produce a particular level of good, I have to think about the opportunity cost involved in this. Your labor could be used to produce something else, right? So there's that opportunity cost rather than working for me. And also the loan that I took out from the bank to purchase the machine and equipment that is producing this good, that loan could have been given to someone else that would be purchasing some other machine and equipment to produce some other kind of good. So there's also that opportunity cost that we have to think about. So the opportunity cost of using the resources is to keep in mind that these resources could be used to produce an alternative or another good or service. So when we look at that marginal cost, this is a very important marginal cost because we're talking about the additional cost, right, in producing that particular good, keeping in mind the resources that were used, the resources that were used to produce that particular good, and that there is an opportunity cost that is associated with it. If if and that's the marginal cost. If I'm producing this good and I'm selling it to you, right, then there is a price that you're willing to pay, and here comes your marginal benefit. You have $5 burning in your pocket. If you're willing to pay $5 for a particular good, then that means that is the benefit that you're getting. You're thinking that this is the value of the good. This is what it's worth to me. And this is the benefit that I'm getting from purchasing this particular good. This is going to be the value, my $5, and we call this the marginal benefit. So for us to be efficient, for this market to be efficient, then it should be that the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. So for efficiency, marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. And basically, what this is saying, and this is something you want to remember, so I'm going to highlight it like that, right? So basically, what we're saying here is that the additional value gained from that last unit should be equal to the additional cost in producing that last unit. So I should say the additional value right? So the additional benefit from that last unit bought is equal to the additional cost in producing that unit. So for you to appreciate, let's say it's not equal. So if the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, then that means whatever you're gaining, like if I'm spending $5 for this, the value that I'm gaining from it is greater than what it's costing the firm to produce it. Then not only are we having a situation where we're not at an efficient part, but it's also a situation where you would want to increase the quantity so as to decrease that marginal benefit and get to equality. So if your marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost, marginal benefit will decrease. I mean, assuming that they're going to decrease all the way to it, right? So if the marginal benefit, meaning to the consumer, the value to the consumer is greater than what it is costing the firm to produce it. So not only should you produce that unit, but you should produce an additional unit because marginals, as we learned all the way back from marginal product or marginals, here in this idea that my marginal benefit, or if you could say another way, if you want to think about it, the satisfaction or what I'm gaining from it will decrease as I get more and more. So my marginal benefit is going to decrease as you increase your quantity and your marginal benefit equal to marginal cost is attained. But if your marginal benefit is less than your marginal cost, then the firm should decrease Q. So as it turns out, when you look at your demand function or when you look at your demand curve, we have all kinds of names for it, is our price equation, etc. Your demand curve is also your marginal benefit curve, right? The fact that you're willing to pay $5 for something is telling you that that is the value. It's telling everyone, you're revealing to everyone that you're getting a level of satisfaction from that particular product that is worth $5. So it's as if you're putting a monetary value to your level of satisfaction. And this is coming all the way from when we did utility and so forth. So when you look at that demand curve, that market demand curve, when you call it a price function, it is also your marginal benefit function, right? It is telling you the value that consumers perceive from this particular goods. In a competitive market, when we look at our marginal, we don't even have to think competitive. When you look at your marginal cost function, this is what we have. So in a competitive situation with no external factors, turns out that this quantity that we call our equilibrium quantity, where we call it QE, this quantity is our efficient quantity. So in a competitive market, with no external factors, in a competitive market with no external factors, the market equilibrium or the equilibrium quantity is the efficient quantity. So for equilibrium, for equilibrium, we would say quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. So our private people in the market or demanders in the market, they're finding where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, right? And for efficiency, we're saying that the marginal benefit, the social marginal benefit, is equal to the social marginal cost. Now, external factors, I said factions, here's factors. Your external factors would be things like there is a externality, right? So there's pollution and there's a bystander that's being affected by the market activity. So by external factor, we're talking about having a third party in the market that is neither a buyer nor a seller in the market. Uh, Exactly. I was just about to get to tax, Mustafa. It's a third party. When you get an external factor, you have a third party in the market, and this third party is neither a buyer nor a seller in the market, but they're being affected by the market activity. And so the bystander, where we have whether it is a positive externality or a negative externality, just think about pollution. Negative is easy to think about. So pollution, you're being affected by the market activity, even though you're not a buyer or a seller in the market. One very quick example is that you could think about cigarette smoking. So you could think about the market for cigarettes, that you're neither a buyer nor a seller, but you are affected, right? Second degree smoke and so forth by the market activity, or, just think about, there are many other things you could think about. Cars driving around, you're not a buyer or a seller, but you're being affected by the pollution emitted from the car. So all of these are external factors. Um, and actually, you can have positive externality, right? Education is a fantastic example. Maybe you're not a buyer nor a seller of education, right? So you're not a university producing and selling education, knowledge, and you're not a buyer, right? You're not a student, so you're not going to go to school at all, but you benefit from education, right? You have a lot of informed individuals making decisions, or you also have a lot of informed individuals doing research on medicines that you benefit from. So you benefit from education. So in those cases, those externalities, you're a bystander that's being affected. And as Mustafa told us right there in the chat, the government intervening in the market is also a situation where you have a third party that's neither a buyer nor a seller. They're not so much of a bystander, but they intervene, right? So they deliberately went into the market, and by implementing a tax, they are getting something from the market, but they're neither a buyer nor a seller in this particular market. So if we have none of these, then when we find that equilibrium quantity, and it is the same as that efficient quantity, right? So these two will give us that same QE. We also measure efficiency by or total surplus also. Total surplus. Now, total surplus is basically the additional surplus that your market players are going to get. So, in a market where you have nobody intervening, if it's only the buyer and the seller in the market, then your total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus. If a bystander is in the market, then the total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus the bystander surplus. If the government is in the market, then total surplus is consumer surplus plus the producer surplus plus the government surplus. So how do we measure our surplus? And this is just a reminder for some of you. I mean, I think you guys did this all along, but just so that we remember, how would we measure our surplus? So remember that for your marginal benefit, remember that what? If I went into, so let's take a very nice example. If I have $10 and I'm very thirsty, I go into the store, I am willing to spend $5 on a bottle of water. I'm so thirsty. But I go into the store and the bottle of water is only $2, that I'm actually spending only $2, then my consumer surplus is going to be $3. I was willing to spend $5. I spend $2. I walk out of the store with a bottle of water that is worth $5 to me. That is how much I was willing to spend on it, but I spend only two. I walk out of the store with a bottle of water and $3 in change. And so my consumer surplus is going to be $3. The price I was willing to pay minus the price I actually paid. Or in other words, my marginal benefit, my value minus the price I'm actually paying. Well, if you look on your demand curve is telling you the value each consumer has on that particular good. And if you're paying the price PE, then this area is your consumer surplus. So your consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the price at the quantity bought. And then we have our producer surplus. And our producer surplus is this area. The producer surplus is the area below the price above the supply curve at the quantity sold. Below the demand curve and above the price So there are a couple of things I want you guys to pay attention to. Yes, it is the area below the demand curve, but I want you to pay attention to that it is at the price paid, it's above the price paid at the quantity bought. So in this case, notice that if the quantity bought is QE and the price you're paying is PE, then your consumer surplus will be this area here, the triangular area. And you know how to calculate the area of a triangle, half the base times the quantity. Similarly, the producer surplus is below the price received, above the supply curve at the quantity sold. Don't worry, the end is near. So what I want to say is at the efficient quantity, there is no deadweight loss. Now, deadweight loss would be that waste of resources. And we're going to see because, and the waste of resources, meaning that you have resources earmarked, allocated toward, in this particular market, that is not being used to produce good or service for the consumer. And so it's being wasted. No one is gaining from it. And that's what we call our deadweight loss. And so we're going to see that at the efficient quantity, there's no deadweight loss. And as it turns out, our monopoly is not being socially efficient. So that's what I want to talk about before we get into the break. I want to go back to our example. So recall our example. We had the market demand, PQ is equal to 100 minus 2Q. And we had this cost function, which is equal to 640 plus 20Q. And I'm going to sketch our graph just to remind us. And just to make our life easy, I'm just going to put the demand curve. We had our marginal cost curve like this. And just for ease, I'm not going to put the marginal revenue because I don't want it to crowd up this area. But this is 20. And if I'm sketching my demand curve, we're going to recognize that at Q equals 0, so this is Q, at Q equals 0, right? At Q equals 0, my demand curve starts out at 100, so this is 100. And then we found that the monopoly, and I'm just going to say QM, right? Or no, I can just say, we found out that the monopoly ended up producing 20, and he was selling it at a price of $60. And if you stare long and hard at this, right? If he's selling it at a price of $60 under the monopoly situation, this little top area is your consumer surplus, and here would be your producer surplus, etc. Okay, but let's talk about that efficiency. What is the efficient quantity?
Where marginal cost and demand intersect, right?
Exactly. You are quite correct. What is the efficient quantity? So your QE occurs where marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost, same as where your price is equal to marginal cost. So if I set my price, so finding QE, if I set my price equal to marginal cost, then I'm saying 100 minus 2Q is equal to 20. So 80 is equal to 2Q. My Q is equal to 40. And since price is equal to marginal cost, my price is equal to 40. So I put in my QE here. This is 40. and this is 20 for the, so this is my QE, and this is my PE, as in efficient. Meanwhile, this is the monopoly quantity, QM, and this is the monopoly price, PM. So the monopoly, if this was a competitive market, by the way, then it means that the competitive firms will collectively supply 40 and charge a price of $20. But as one firm, a monopoly would supply 20 and charge a price of $60. So if you look at this kind of situation, then it turns out that your deadweight loss is equal to this area. This area is your deadweight loss. Because if I look at this, my consumer surplus under the monopoly is going to be below the demand curve and above the price at the quantity bought. And under the monopoly, you're buying 20 and you're paying a price of $60. So under the monopoly, this becomes your consumer surplus. If, hmm, and your producer surplus is going to be the area, what we just said it. The producer surplus is the area below the price received, above the supply curve, right? So above the marginal cost curve at the quantity sold. So this ends up being your producer surplus. So one quick way for you to figure out what your producers, to figure out the deadweight loss, is your deadweight loss is usually this area between the price buyers are willing to pay and the price sellers are willing to receive times the difference in the quantity. So your deadweight loss area in this case, let's just say my deadweight loss is not equal to 0. So the monopoly is not efficient. And in fact, my deadweight loss is going to be equal to that area of the triangle is a half times the price minus the marginal cost times the monopoly quantity subtracted from the efficient quantity. Right? Now you got to be careful because this is the monopoly price and this is the marginal cost at the monopoly quantity, right? So for those of you that like to write down a formula and you're probably thinking about what am I going to memorize or have sitting down near me when I'm doing the exam, this is one way that you can look at the formula to calculate your deadweight loss. And thank you so much. It is equal to wait, was that the answer someone told me? Yeah, thank you so much. It is equal to okay, I'll do that and then we take a break. So our deadweight loss is equal to a half times, this is going to be 60 minus 20 these are in dollars, right? Times the quantity, this is 40 minus 20. And so your deadweight loss is equal to, this is 40 times 20, 800 divided by 2, and this is going to be 400. And by the way, these are dollar amounts, right? You're putting a dollar value on the wasted resources in this particular market. Just because it was asked, we can also, this is our aside, that under the monopoly, our consumer surplus is going to be equal to a half times. Now, if you look on the monopoly, when I'm calculating it, the quantity is always a quantity, right? So that's no big deal. I mean, when I'm calculating consumer surplus. So notice you're going to take from the demand intercept price, which is 100, minus the price paid, which is 60, and then you're going to multiply this by 20. It is not always a square. Your producer surplus in this situation is a square simply because your marginal cost curve is constant. If your marginal cost curve was upward sloping, then it would be a triangle. But I noticed that in our lecture activity, all the marginal cost curves that I gave you were a straight line. So I'm guessing you're going to try to tell me not to be adventurous in the yeah, see, that's exactly what you're asking me. Not to be adventurous in the exam and give you an upward sloping marginal cost curve. I knew that was going to come. You know, I've been with you guys for 5 weeks. I think I kind of can predict what's going to come next. And like I've been saying, I've been doing this for over 88 years. And so, you know, this, after a while, you can anticipate the question that it's going to show up. You know, it's over 10 decades almost. Not 10, but okay, it's like 8 decades, but, you know, at least 3 generations. And with 3 generations, after a while, you figure out what's happening. Okay, so if we calculate the, we like to be on the safe side. So no one likes to go bungee jumping late in the night without any light. Fantastic. So if we calculate the consumer surplus, it's going to be 40 times 20, which is, that's too much math for me. Oh, that's 800 divided by 2. So the consumer surplus is also 400. And the producer surplus in this case, since it is a rectangle, it's going to be 60 minus 20 times 20, and this is going to be 800. So in this case, since you have only the firm and the consumer in the market, your total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus, which is equal to 1200. So the one last thing I'm going to say, and then you can get your, then you can take that brief break, is that under the competitive market, so under the competitive market, where price is equal to $20 and Q is equal to 40. So under the competitive market, where we actually go to where price is equal to $20, it's QE minus QM just because I write it that way because I want to get a positive value. It is definitely a QM minus QE, and a loss is a loss, so it should be negative. So I just wrote it that way just because I wanted to get it a positive value. But you're right. Since I'm calling it a loss, which is why I want to just say 400 rather than rather than get it. Right. So on the test, it doesn't matter whether you give me positive or negative. As a matter of fact, it's just simple. If you think about it grammatically, it should be, if you say deadweight loss, then it should be a positive value. Just as if you say the firm made an economic loss of $200, you wouldn't say economic loss of -2. So for the monopoly, for the competitive market, you're going to be all the way to here. So as it turns out, the consumer surplus, so that this is very ironic, the consumer surplus is going to be the area below the demand curve, above the price paid. In a competitive market, you're paying $20 at the quantity bought. So the consumer surplus is going to be this very huge triangle. But if you stare at it, the producer surplus is zero because the price received by the producer is $20 and the demand or the supply curve for the producer is actually $20. So it's going to be 20 minus 20 times 40. And so the producer surplus is equal to zero. So under the competitive market, the consumer surplus is equal to a half times 100 minus 20 times 40. And this is going to be 80 times 40 is 3,200. 3,200 divided is giving you 1,600. And your producer surplus is going to be equal to zero. It's going to be, that rectangle area is going to be 20 minus 20 times your 40, and it's going to be equal to zero. So your total surplus, which is equal to consumer surplus plus producer surplus, is going to be equal to $1,600. So no surprise, your total surplus here, right? I want you guys to notice that your total surplus here under the competitive market is greater than the total surplus under the is greater than your total surplus under your monopoly. And the difference is actually the deadweight loss, right? So under the monopoly, the difference is deadweight loss, which is loss to both the consumer and the producer. So you could always find your deadweight loss in that manner as well. Let me answer that question when we come back. Let's see what we finish up with when we come back.
The recording has stopped.
So we're going to take our usual and give you guys a chance to ask them. Thank you, Christy. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so let us continue. And now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the government trying to regulate the monopoly. Now, of course, you know that the government could implement a tax in this particular market. And for many reasons, I mean, usually, even though they're gaining revenue, sometimes implementing the tax, there is a social reason involved in implementing the tax in that particular market. And we can certainly talk about implementing a tax. But before we talk about implementing a tax, I want us to focus a little bit about, especially since we've talked about taxes before. But what I want to focus on a little bit about is regulating the monopoly, especially since this monopoly behavior, the one good thing that we're getting out of it is that the monopoly is able to enjoy fantastic profit. It's not far fetched to believe that a monopoly could be earning an economic loss, but this is not something that would be sustainable, and usually is not the case because if you're earning a loss, you wouldn't be in that market anyway trying to provide that particular product. It's a little bit far fetched, although we're trying. You don't want to say it will never ever happen. So here we have the monopoly, he's earning a profit. However, what we're seeing from everything that we have just gone through here, especially talking about uh, efficiency and surplus, one of the things that we're definitely seeing that is showing up is that under the monopoly, the consumer surplus is less, right? So the consumer hurts in this situation, right? They're getting a lower surplus than they would on the competitive market. Not only that, but the monopoly quantity is less than the efficient quantity. Under the monopoly, they're only selling 20 units. Under the competitive, they're selling a whopping 40 units. And then also under the monopoly, they're charging $60, while under the competitive market, the price would have been $20. So you're paying more, you're getting less. The consumer is also losing on potential surplus, right? And then finally, there is this inefficient allocation of resources. You're getting deadweight loss, LOSS, deadweight loss under the monopoly that you wouldn't have under the competitive market. So with all of these situations occurring, you can imagine that maybe the government may say, well, let's try to regulate the monopoly in such a way that you don't have this inefficient use of resources, you don't have this loss in resources, inefficient or not being allocated inefficient or not being allocatively efficient. You're not having this situation. And also, the consumers are not being hurt by the monopoly behavior, getting fewer products, paying a higher price, when, of course, we can see that they were definitely willing to buy more of that good because your marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost at the monopoly output. So the government says, okay, let me come in and regulate this monopoly behavior into one that would be good for everybody. And there are different types of regulation that they could have. And one regulation that they could try or they'd like to use, especially if we're going after this deadweight loss scenario, we want a more efficient outcome from the monopoly behavior, is that you could do what is called optimal price regulation. So your regulation, and this is usually, right? We're not going to get into the political aspects of it, of whether there's some political reasons why you're regulating or not regulating, right? Which, on the aside, as a plug, I mean, most of you are leaving, but one fantastic combination that you could always do is political science and economics, because of course, the people who are doing the laws and so forth, the legislative body, that comes on the political science part. And then economics, we look on the impact of these laws. But, not to get into that, your regulation seeks to address The lower quantity higher price and or the efficiency or the inefficiency from the monopoly behavior. Right? So they're trying to make them maybe produce more, like satisfy a greater need, demand out there, charge a lower price. This price is crazy, or let us try to minimize the loss to society from your inefficient allocation of resources. So there are ways that they could regulate, and one regulation that they could choose is what we call the optimal price regulation. So one method is the optimal price regulation. So with our optimal price regulation, hold on a second. Usually around about now, I think it has something to do with the time.
The recording has stopped.
I don't know. I really do think it has something to do with the time when it messes up like this. So hold on a second. Okay. Okay. So I had to restart. Regulation seeks to address the lower quantity. Higher price or the inefficient behavior of the monomer. From the monopoly behavior. Oh, I'm alone. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I was sharing. Very good of you to point that out. Share screen. Seeing it now? You know what? And that Bijan, that is a very good that's a very good conclusion to draw because, as you know, I do that a lot. Okay, so I restarted it, and I had to rewrite this part, which is the part that you thought I was talking to myself. I was rewriting that, and so, oh wait, I'm pretty sure I'm not recording. Hold on.
This meeting is being recorded.
So when you seek to regulate the monopoly, they're either trying to address one of these issues that the quantity is too low or the price is too high, or we're having this deadweight loss coming out from the monopoly. Now, one way that they can do it, so the tools, if you want to call it that way, so we could call it your regulation tools, and we're just going to talk about two of them today. Well, three, but we're going to focus on two. So one regulation tool that they could use is what we call the optimal price regulation. And under optimal price regulation, basically, you're instructing the monopoly that they have to charge a price that is equal to marginal cost. So with this regulation, the monopoly is regulated or is told the monopoly charges So if you're going to choose where your price is equal to marginal cost, essentially what they're telling them to do is to get to that efficient outcome and choose where price is equal to marginal cost, and you're going to get that efficient quantity and that efficient price. And so in this situation, your deadweight loss will be equal to zero. This results into deadweight, this results into the efficient quantity and price being the market outcome. And deadweight loss is equal to zero, right? So there's no deadweight loss if you're at that efficient situation where you're choosing price equal marginal cost. The only problem with this is that sometimes profit is negative, and that will deter the monopoly from engaging in this. Like you got to try to make the monopoly happy, so the government may decide, you know what, I'm going to subsidize this regulation. I want you to go where price is equal to marginal cost, but because it's going to end up with negative profit, I'm going to subsidize your behavior. So for every unit you sell, I'm going to give you $2 extra, let's say, on your price per unit. They're going to subsidize it to encourage the monopoly to go out there and that the monopoly will still get a profit, especially if the profit is negative in this situation. So it's not attractive simply because profit could be equal to zero and the government now faces an additional expenditure, right? And I shouldn't say additional, but the government now faces an expenditure on top of having this regulation. And by the way, in such a situation, if the government does decide to spend money to support this regulatory rule, then realize that even though I'm saying total surplus is maximized, deadweight loss is equal to zero, it is not exactly equal to zero if you think about the government spending money in this market. So in this case, your total surplus is not the greatest when the government intervenes with this subsidy. And so total surplus is actually not maximized because you now have consumer surplus, which is positive, producer surplus, but you have the government surplus, which is negative because they are now spending money in the market and you still get a deadweight loss. So in that case, or you get a loss somewhere. So in that case, it's not exactly ideal if the government decides to intervene with a subsidy along with this regulation. But if they didn't intervene with a subsidy in this regulation, even though they're getting deadweight loss equal to zero, it's not attractive if this regulation leads to profit being negative. Right? And so if this regulation, price equal marginal cost, leads to a negative profit, so this is the part where I'm saying once you get a negative profit, now you're going to have to try to make the monopoly want to still provide this service, right? Maybe it is a needed service like public transportation. So they do need to provide this service. You need them in there to provide the service. So now I'm going to subsidize you. But you got to keep in mind that by me subsidizing you, by the government subsidizing you, it has some implication on your total surplus now because your total surplus in the market is not the highest that it could be just because of what's going on with the government. So in this case, if you're getting a negative profit from this optimal price regulation, another way that they could do this is by saying, you know what, let's do average cost pricing. And in this situation, with your average cost pricing, the monopoly charges a price equal to the average cost. So the monopoly will go ahead and charges the price equal to average total cost. So in this case, it's attractive because you're not interfering with their profit. So the monopoly profit is equal to zero, and the monopoly may be indifferent in the monopoly. So, you know, of course, it's not a positive profit, which is what they would want, but it's not something that they hate completely because they're still getting that normal profit. And if you think about all the resources or everything, all the opportunity costs, think about the profit that goes to the entrepreneur. So maybe the entrepreneur is collecting some bonus for if they sell a certain amount, that is going to be part of the cost to the firm. And so you can imagine that in such a situation, getting profit equal to zero is not necessarily a bad thing, right? So it's not greater than zero, but it's definitely not necessarily a bad thing. The good thing about this also is that more often than not, the quantity increases and the price that they're charging decreases. So the quantity sold and the price charged are higher and lower respectively. So they are higher HNG and lower respectively compared to the monopoly. Now, sometimes the problem comes in trying to determine that average total cost. And as I say, that average total cost may change over time. I mean, there may be creative ways in which the monopoly can get this average total cost to change over time and thereby changing their price over time. So one way that you could just get right at it is just to charge a price ceiling, right? Or to implement a price ceiling in the market. So I could call this part 2.5, if you will. So the government can implement a price ceiling. Well, let's call it that. So if they implement a price ceiling, this could get to that situation a little bit easier. And if we go back to our example that we had, and with our example, let's just say it was price is equal to 100 minus 2Q, and we had our cost function is equal to 640 plus 20Q. So if the government imposes a price ceiling and they say that the price has to be equal to $48, then they can't charge more than $48, right? So then you can find a monopoly quantity. You're going to say at P equals $48, quantity is going to be equal using the demand equation. Right? I have 48 is equal to 100 minus 2 times Q. And if I solve for this, my Q is equal to, well, that's a lot of math. So my 2 times Q is equal to, yes, thank you. So my Q is equal to 26. You're quite right. My Q is equal to 26. My Q is equal to 26. And so I can calculate the revenue at 26 is equal to $48 times 26, which is equal to 1248. And my cost at 26 is equal to 640 plus 20 times 26. Fantastic. Somebody worked it out for me because you know I'm slow. 1288. Huh? Is it really? Okay, so 20 times 26 is 520 plus 640. No, I can still trust you. See, Christy came through for us. 1160. I still trust you guys. So your profit at 26 is equal to, and I know somebody got it for me. That's actually very nice for everyone, not just for yourself. And so that's fantastic. 1248 minus 1160, and that's going to equal to 88. And maybe that was where the first 88 came from, and the 12 was just a mistype, you know? How about that? Maybe that's what Louis was trying to say. 88 and the 12 just, you know, mistyped in. So the profit here is $88. And so the firm is making a profit in this situation. And if I wanted to sketch really quickly or graph from long ago, remember that this is 20. This is my demand. We know this point already that this is 40. But now if you're told that the firm is selling 26 and the price is 28, this is 26 and the price is 48. I'm sorry, 48. Without me doing any calculations, you guys will see that this deadweight loss is definitely going to be smaller. So your deadweight loss is smaller. So the deadweight loss is smaller than at QM equals to 20, right? Because the monopoly quantity was 20. Remember from long ago, it was 20 and the monopoly price was $60. But now you're charging a lower one, you're charging $48. And so, you know, and since it's a price ceiling, you're really having a horizontal line right here. This is your price ceiling. You get a lower deadweight loss. The monopoly still gets its profit greater than zero, and you're able to lower the deadweight loss with that kind of behavior. Alrighty, so I never talked about taxes in this situation, and I don't want to overwhelm you too much, but if the government does implement a tax, then you're just going to say the marginal cost is marginal cost plus tax. So if the government does implement the tax, then then it's going to be marginal cost plus the tax on the monopoly side. Okay, so I hear the plea and I hear the cry, and as a benevolent dictator, I'm going to say yes, no tax tomorrow. Oh yeah, no, that's pushing it. We just went through chapter 11. Chapter 11 will be on tomorrow. So I'm going to stop here for now. Let me just.
The recording has stopped.
So no tax for tomorrow. We'll just make sure that we understand the optimal price regulation and average price regulation. We did chapter 11. Automatic 100s who say no. Well, you know what? I'll tell you who say no. The people who care about if I'm going to curve. Yeah, this is not happening. Life is not free. As we know, there's an opportunity cost. About the stimulus final, I will have to check with the government. Even though I'm a dictator, I do have members of the parliament that I would have to ask them to do voting on, and that is too much, not enough time. So I need to check with the government. Okay, ask me about lecture activity 5. That's a very good point to make right there. About the curve, can't tell before the test. Lecture activity 5. So the answer key has been posted. What I want to do is I actually pulled up the answer key. The answer key has been posted for quite a while. Was there any question that anyone had about it? I try to be as detailed as possible with the answer key here. So for the first one, we have our marginal cost is constant at 10, and there is a fixed cost of. And by the way, actually, let me just say this right here, and I'll put it on our class note. This is a very important aside, actually. And I don't know how many of you noticed this. And I think I may have said it before. But if you think about your marginal cost, okay, good. If you think about the marginal cost, okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
If you think about the marginal cost, remember your cost, and I think I wrote this on another lecture note somewhere. But remember that your marginal cost is equal to the derivative or the changing cost when you change your quantity. And since only variable costs changes when you change your quantity, since only variable cost changes when quantity changes, then your marginal cost is equal to the change in your variable cost when you change quantity. Now, why am I saying all of that? If I have my marginal cost here, this is the marginal cost. It's each point on my marginal cost curve is telling me what is the additional cost to produce that additional unit. And if I sum it all together, then it's going to tell me what is the total additional cost to produce that total additional units. So if I sum it all together, then I'm actually getting the variable cost. So if I look at my marginal cost curve, the area under my marginal cost curve gives me my total variable cost. So the area So that's one thing to note. The other thing to note is that if your marginal cost is constant, so every time you're producing an additional unit, you're adding the same amount, then your average variable cost is your marginal cost. So if marginal cost is constant, then your marginal cost is the same as your average variable cost. Now, if it is not constant, if your marginal cost increases when you're changing your quantity, so if it slopes up, then your average variable cost also increases, and they're different, right? So, and just the aside, for those of us, adventurous and you like to look at the equations and so forth, if your marginal cost curve is a straight line, but it's increasing, so perhaps marginal cost is 2 plus Q, then your average variable cost is below your marginal cost, but it's also a straight line upward sloping as well. So those are just two asides that I wanted to say right there.
The recording has stopped.
Now, if you look on the lecture activity, and we have, I think my time is up, but with the lecture activity, I really tried to put a lot of explanation on each of our questions in calculating the areas as well, in consumer surplus, producer surplus, and government revenue and welfare. So I put a lot of points out there. And I want you guys to go through. Like I said, I'm not going to give you tax on the exam, so you don't have to pay attention to this part E and part F. But you definitely want to go back and go through and look on at least from part H, where we did the optimal price regulation. And then we went on to talk about the price ceiling. So H and I and J and K are very important things that you want to look on for the exam. You can ignore the time. It's there on Blackboard. I actually posted it so you had it from yesterday. So the answer key for lecture activity 6 has been sitting up there from yesterday morning in the Sum Solution folder. The other thing now, so really quickly, just remember that we're going to meet here in Zoom, and then you're going to access the exam on Blackboard. We're going to probably start at around 2:15, just in case there are any questions and so forth that you want to ask me when we meet at 2 o'clock. And then also just to realize that if we want to talk, if you have a question, the meeting in Zoom allow you to raise your hand or even just say, I have a question. Better to raise your hand. No problem, good. Better to raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, I'll see. And then we can go to a break room privately, you and I, and you can ask your question there if you have any question that you want to ask. That way, I don't want to put people out in break room, and if you don't call on me, I don't know you're there. Or even if I put you in the break room, what you could do is, you could call on me. And if you don't call on me or you don't know how to, if you leave the break room and come back to the regular room, then you can ask me a question there. Either way, we'll figure it out tomorrow. That's not least of our problem. But I'm going to ask you 2 short answer questions. And you know that we went through, we definitely went through a lot with or competitive firms and our competitive market and that kind of lecture activity. So something like that definitely is going to show up. And then the only other thing that could possibly show up, yes, it's going to be 40%. The only other thing that could possibly show up in terms of short answer is going to be something on Monopoly, or it's going to be something on the production the production model that we had, finding the cost and expansion path and so forth. But so for sure I'm going to ask you something about competitive market with the short answer. I don't know how many parts are in the short answer question as yet, but I try to make it. There's a yin and a yang with it. Like I have to make it enough that each part is not worth like 20 points, right? If I have only 2 parts in the short answer question and each part is worth 20 points or 10 points, and if you get it wrong, and you lose 5 points or something like that. So I have to be careful and make you have enough parts that they're not weighted that much each individually. But that's it. If you think about it, there's so much and no more that I can ask you. 3 chapters, I know it feels like a lot, but it is not a lot. And remember, as I said on the study guide about the questions on the exam, that we're going to have 24 questions. So they're going to be 24 multiple choice questions. And so if 60 divided by 24 on a fantastic day is 2.5. So each question is worth 2.5. So they're going to be 24 questions. Each question's worth 2.5. And that's your multiple choice. And then your short answer is going to be 2 short answer questions. And I'm telling you, 1 short answer question is definitely on the competitive market. If I were you, I would make sure I go over, what is that? Lecture activity 5. I would make sure I go over lecture activity 5 to see what are you able to change the weekend view of it? No, I can't change that. That's a nice question, but no, I'm not. You're not going to view all the questions all at once. Viewing all the, I know you're being very honest about your time consuming and so forth, and everybody here is quite honest. But putting all the questions at once is not a way that we can go about in this environment. The other thing that I also want to say is that we're starting at 2:15 and you have extra time. In the sense that we start at 2:15 and you're going to have your 2 hours, or you have actually, isn't it all of the class I'm giving you? So from 2:15 to 4:30 is going to give you, that's a lot of math, 2 hours and 15 minutes. So you do have, so it's more time. Asking about the time as a previous exam, you actually have more time. You're getting 2 hours as one would usually get for a final exam, and you're getting that 15 minutes extra just in case you want to go back and check what you're doing. So you want to keep that in mind. There's a countdown clock. Also, if I try to make an announcement telling you the time as it goes along. So I'll tell you when you have 1 hour remaining. I'll tell you when you have half an hour remaining. And people, please, it's way better to put something, not just anything, but it's way better to answer a question than to be frozen and go, I don't know, and just throw your hands in the air. You're hindering yourself that way. Actually, you're actually hurting and hindering yourself if you decide not to answer a question. So it's better to just put down a very educated guess than to not put anything at all. And yes, you can get some partial credit provided that the answer makes sense, right? So if it asks for the quantity and you put down $200, then that's not going to give you partial credit. So it's got to be provided that it is provided that it follows and it makes sense with the question. So it's not automatic, but you want to be careful with that. And people, just my last word of encouragement, there's so much and no more I can ask. if you think about it, all we have done is what is the quantity the firm is selling? What is the price? What is the profit? As a matter of fact, you probably want me to put monopoly as the short answer question over putting the production part, which you probably forgot all about from chapter 7. You more likely want me to put monopoly because all I can really ask you is what is the price, what is the quantity, what is the profit, and such the like, what is the consumer surplus and so forth and so forth. Okay. I think I gave you enough hint already, Andrew. I already tell you you're getting a perfectly competitive question. Yes, I will be generous with my grading, actually. So when you say it's confusing, think lecture activity 5 when we went through that whole spiel of how many firms are in the market, what is the if demand increases, and this is the new price, what would be the quantity that is being sold in the short run? What would be the price? Well, I told you what the price is. What would you expect to happen in the long run? Will firms come in? Will firms leave? Do you expect the price to decrease? Do you expect the price to increase? So this is what I mean when I talk about the competitive market. That looking, I could give you a question that say the market is in long run equilibrium, demand increases. And if demand increases, I could say this is a new price. I could ask you, what is the firm's profit? What do you expect to happen in the long run? Fill in the blank. In the long run, the number of firms in the market will fill in the blank. Will it increase, decrease, or remain the same? And you have to fill in the blank and write in the word increase, or fill in the blank and write in the word decrease. And that's one way I could set up a question in this. What will happen to profit in the long run equilibrium? Will profit increase, decrease, or remain the same? Fill in the blank. In the long run, the firm profit will, and there's the blank. And you have to put in the word increase, or put in the word decrease, or put in the word remain the same. So these are how I could put in my short answer question. That's why I say think lecture activity 5 for the short answer, right? And then for the other short answer question, it's either going to be lecture activity 8 or it's going to be lecture activity 4. And honestly, 6 or lecture activity 4. And honestly, the reason why I don't know yet is because I have to sit down and think. But for sure, it's going to be lecture activity 5 for one of the short answer questions. And I just mentioned lecture activity 6 because I was saying that, more likely than not, you would prefer me ask a question from lecture activity 6 because you just learned it. I'm sure some of you forgot what we did with lecture activity 4. Okay. Feeling any better? A little bit more confident? Am I alone? You know what? And thank you. And Arjan, that you're so good on that, because if you guys took the exam now, yes, I'm alone. If you guys took the exam now, you probably would do better because a lot of things are fresh on your mind. I was asked to be generous with the grading, and I will be generous with the grading. No worries on that. All right. So you guys study well. I heard all what you're saying. No, not alone. Feeling more. Okay. Just checking. So you guys have a very good night. Study well. Study efficiently. And I see you guys at 2:00 tomorrow. If you have any questions, I'll try to be up a little bit late today to answer any questions if you have any questions. And no price discrimination, definitely not. Didn't ask, so no. You're very welcome. See you tomorrow and have a fantastic summer too. Well, see you tomorrow. We'll say have a fantastic summer later on. Have a good night, everyone. You're welcome. Have a good night. Thank you.